Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I'm going to be showing the game I played in the 4NCL Spring Congress on Tuesday night, on the 16th of February. And for the second round, I'd won the first game against someone who was around 1850. So in the second game, it didn't surprise me that I would get a stronger opponent. This person is about, at 1900 is the estimate because they don't actually have a FIDE rating. But they're experienced. I believe they're about 50 years old, roughly. So in some ways, you get the older players who kind of get a second wind once they either retire or they study more in chess, because they have tons of intuitive experience, and usually they know endings fairly well. So I can't take this person, I can't assume they're going to be an easy win. I have to play well. And I'd noticed that when I prepped for him, that he played a3 at move 1 a lot of the time. It's a kind of transpositional tool. It essentially is, you're playing as black a lot of games, but you just try and transpose to an opening that you may know better than your opponent. I didn't really have much time to prep, though, because I was prepping one of my private students for their game in another section of the 4NCL Congress. So I decided e5. If white plays e4, the move a3 is almost useless in this system. So I almost forced an English opening, where I'm fairly comfortable as black a lot of the games. Although a3 you could argue is useful, because white often tries to go b4 later in the game. Knight f6, d3, pure English, d5, and we trade. So here black is comfortable. I believe that black is completely equal here. So knight f3, knight c6, and both of us are developing our pieces. b4 is unusual, and I did think about playing a5 here, trying to undermine the pawn. However, white might have b5 and it's a bit awkward. So I decided on bishop e6, and the plan was that if b5 is played, I didn't quite know what to do, but I was thinking about knight d4. Knight takes would be the only challenging move, and then I have two options. I could play knight takes b5, which is possibly what I would do, and that's my what I call bailout move. If nothing else works and my idea is rubbish, I can take the pawn. I'm in no real danger. Like, worst case scenario, I'm a tiny bit worse. I had an idea though to play knight c3, which at first looks absolutely awful. But the point is that if white does something along the lines of knight takes knight, I have bishop to b3, queen d2 is the only saving move, and then I have knight c2 check, and I get what's called a windmill. Knight takes rook, king back over, then I return to the previous position, where I've now taken a rook. I can then repeat again with knight takes pawn, and repeat a third time. It's not a repetition though, because even though black's pieces are in the same place, white has actually lost material. And here I wasn't 100% sure what the best move would be. Double check is good, knight to e3. I could hold the windmill another turn with bishop b4, for example. Queen d4 is a move. I just thought it was very, very pleasant for black. I'm clearly winning with this extra rook, even though I've lost a piece to get it. So yeah, there's no problems at all for black, and things are going very well. And if they do queen d2, which is of course an option as well, perhaps I don't have anything. Maybe there's no tactic. But again, worst case scenario, I can just grab this pawn, and I'm threatening all sorts of stuff. Knight b3, bishop b3, trying to do that windmill again. Queen f6 or d5 could be useful for the queen. And I'm fully developed, pretty much. So this is fairly successful. And also, horrible blunder, if pawn a4, not only do I have knight b3, but I have the horrible bishop b4 pinning the queen. If they block with their knight, I just take it, still pinning. Queen takes, then knight c2 with a fork on the king, queen, and also rook. Family fork. So I have tons of play for the pawn. And this is quite a common theme seen in the reversed Sicilian, where black can often give up the e5 pawn with knight d4. So it wasn't like I'd come up with this brilliant idea by myself. A lot of it was pattern recognition. So my opponent played a sensible move, bishop b2. And then I don't like playing the move f6. However, it is useful because there's a lot of lines where after white does a fianchetto with g3, bishop g2, black plays bishop e7 and castles. And it's almost like the I think it's the English attack in the regular Sicilian, where white has this structure and black is playing a kind of dragon system. But because white's a tempo up, they do have some attack on the queen side. However, I know this is about equal, so I'm not too scared of playing it. So e3 came as a surprise to me. I was expecting g3. And e3, this sets a few different problems. So e4 would have been more of a Sveshnikov Sicilian, but reversed. But in that case, I think their bishop on b2 is then a bit misplaced, and I can play knight f4. So here I just played a simple preventative move, a6. Although possibly this is an error. Maybe I should play bishop e7 and just let them play b5. And maybe I can go after their queenside structures later in the game. But queen c2, bishop e7, knight bd2, keeping their bishop on b2 open. So knight c3 maybe would have been a slight error. Castles on the king side. Rook c1 from white. Here I think I played an error, a bit of a mistake. I played queen d7, and later on I discovered the queen was not in the right place. It's quite a natural move, queen d7, because it connects the rooks and has your queen improving a little. But I think instead I should have immediately played queen e8 with the idea of either queen f7 or queen g6, or even queen h5, trying to go kingside with an attack. So yeah, this move is a slight error. Bishop e2, rook a d8. I'm in the right frame of mind. I know that I should try going on the king side and centre, so rook a d8 makes sense from that perspective. Castles, and then king h8, preventing any kind of checks with moves like queen b3. You'll see why in a minute. Knight to e4. And here, what do you think black's worst piece is right now? What piece is the least active? My thinking was that the e6 bishop is pretty good, controlling the centre. The knights are also fairly well placed. And the rook on d8 and the queen on d7 are about as good as I can make them, barring the idea of queen e8, queen g6, which is what I eventually did. My thoughts actually were the rook on f8 wasn't great right now. I'd have to improve it somehow with maybe f5. And to be honest, my bishop on e7, while it's holding the pawns and defending, it's not actually doing a whole lot. So first I improve the queen, and white shuffles around with the knights, like this. So white's still going queenside. And then I did think about playing f5, but I wasn't sure it was correct. I thought white could maybe swing the knight to c5 later. So here I played a radical move, bishop takes b4. And my thought was that white would take back with their pawn, because why not? Then knight takes b4 with the d5 knight, so my bishop is uncovered attacking the b3 knight. The white queen doesn't really have many squares it can actually use. I thought that d1 was best, to be honest, because if c3 I have a fork, knight to a2. So queen d1, I'm making the white pieces look absolutely horrible, and I thought I could play f5 with the idea of knight c5, saving the piece, and then bishop d5. And to me, this felt very awkward. White is, having to defend against mate. I do have bishop takes b3 or knight takes d3 at some future stage. Pawn f4 would improve my rook and keep my attack rolling. And if I can win that d3 pawn without dropping any of the other ones, I have 3 pawns for a bishop with the initiative. And when I check this on a computer, it does say that white is better because, because a computer can play it perfectly as white. But I thought psychologically and also practically, it's not easy to play this very well when you're defending. And also, I mean, again, it might be rating snobbery, but I just felt that with a 1900, if I keep pressuring them, they're going to make errors. So this was my plan. But instead, I was very surprised when he played the best move, I think, knight c5. The computer says it's very similar to pawn takes bishop, and it doesn't have any of the problems associated with it. So it might be a move that maybe if I'd have seen it, I would have played in a game. And I'm pretty much forced to play bishop takes knight. I can't leave the bishop hanging too long, because white will pressure me on the queen side, and I'll still be down a piece with less attack. So we trade, and I run away, keeping the b7 pawn alive. Very nice move, knight takes a6, which will deflect my pawn on b7 from protecting the c6 knight. And here I decide to go for broke with knight to d4. What this does is that if white doesn't do anything, I take the queen or I take the knight on a4, a6. So I was expecting pawn takes. And then here I was contemplating whether to play knight f4 or bishop h3. And I thought that possibly bishop h3 is a touch better, but it looks very close. I think I'm going to play both those moves fairly soon anyway, to be honest. Maybe bishop h3 is a touch better. And after, say, bishop f3 to defend the mate, I can take the knight. And I'm not losing on pieces anymore, although I'm probably not quite mating. But I also had knight f4, which is also very awkward for white to meet as a threat, because I'm attacking that g2 pawn several times now. And if g3, then I can either take the rook or take the knight. I suppose taking the knight may be a touch better, but taking the rook also looks very, very good. And white's really struggling here. So that was my idea, but again, he played the right move, bishop takes d4. So my pressuring hasn't seemed to work very well. He's found a solution to each one of my moves. Knight takes c7. I then decide that I'm going to try improving the knight and improve the position. I was hoping he would play e takes d4, when I don't think I'm actually that much worse. I'll have a bishop against knight in the endgame, because I'll trade on e2, and the pawn up white will be is essentially just the d pawn, because I'm going to take on d4 and I'll have a d3 pawn extra, which will be attacked several times. So my guess is it's about equal. But after bishop f3, I played bishop g4. Again, I'm going for tricks, essentially. White has to play the correct move here. Otherwise, it's completely winning. So, for example, if white just plays a ridiculous move like pawn takes pawn, I can then take the bishop and I'm crushing here. White has to play bishop takes g4. Everything else loses. So I took, and I had a trap set, and he played the move which I thought allowed it, f3, and I immediately play queen d7. The knight is trapped. But can you see white's amazing resource they have to actually stay on top? Sorry. Alright, well, gave a bit more time than I thought with that, so white has the move e takes d4. Excellent move, and it does make my knight not able to be defended. So wherever I move my knight, the white's knight will either get out or take my own knight. This is something I didn't see from a couple of moves before. When I played bishop g4, I'd seen up to here, and I'd missed this move. So I had to take the knight, they took back, and my feeling was that if I traded queens, white would have enough to win. So I played queen f4, thinking I could win the pawn anyway on d4. White played rook fe1, and then I took. And thinking perhaps with the queens on I can draw this match, and also, again, white's extra pawn is a d pawn, which is isolated, so it's pretty rubbish. But then the move rook e4 was played, which, I mean, I briefly looked at, but I didn't really appreciate it. Because after rook takes, which pawn would you recapture with if you were white? My feeling had been that it was the more ambitious move to play f takes. From a long-term perspective, if this d pawn can, get to maybe d4 or d5, then it's very, very strong. It's a protected pass pawn. The downside is pawn structure. White has three sort of groups of pawns on G and H, E and D, and then the third one all on its own on A. Whereas I only have two groups. I have HGF, that's one island of pawns, and then a B pawn on its own. So the more groups, the more islands you have, the worse your pawn structure becomes. And here I thought I could draw this at least with queen e3 check. And after maybe queen h1, I might have rook d8, which will potentially solve my problems, because white, I don't think, can hold on to that pawn very long. I'm aware that there might be a tactic where I get mated on the back line, so if the move a4 happens, I'm not going to play taking the pawn. But I could play something like h6, and then I'm solving that problem, and also white hasn't really done anything to address the problem with their pawn. And if rook d1 is played, I have the move queen takes e4, where I'm now mating them on the back rank if they take my queen. So in the game, he played the right move. He took with the d pawn to keep his pawns all together. I improved the rook b1, h6 to avoid any mates, and I was feeling like rook d1 would at least draw, but I thought perhaps I could even try for more if white allowed rook d1 check. So he kicked me away, and I retreated with the queen. I'm still thinking perhaps queen d1 is useful, and I thought I would have something here, but then he gets away after I do a couple of checks, and I don't really have a good way to blast my way through. So my thought was that I could play rook c2 to prevent queen c8, and I'd seen up to here in my head from a few moves previously when rook takes b7 was played, and I thought I was winning this, because if the queen goes to b4 or something like this, I have all sorts of things I can play. I can go queen f1, which is pretty good. I have queen takes f3, which also looks very, very good. And I might even have the move h5, leading to mate. So if I turn the computer on, I believe that, I haven't looked at this bit on the computer, I believe that black should be completely winning here. But apparently not. Apparently I'm wrong. I thought black had something. Apparently queen f1 is a draw. And king h7 is the next best move. Alright, so I'm wrong in that regard then. Queen f1 draws. Okay, but at least I'm not losing. And white gets away. Alright. So, after this, they played the best move though. They played queen a5. And I actually now realise that the plan was rook b8, and then queen f5 check, and I lose. And that's what I'd been trying to prevent with rook c2. I prevented queen c8 check going to f5. And here, the best I could see was to play queen f3, and if he wanted to, which he apparently did, he can go into a drawn endgame where I actually, I'm the one who can lose this if I'm not careful. So my move paralyzes the king. I make it so that white cannot move the king without losing a pawn. So rook b5 is played. If g4 had been played, I had rook f3 winning the a-pawn. Now h5 preventing g4 and king g4. A4 from white, I move the king up to try and target the f5 pawn, which is, in a way, it's isolated. It's in its own area. It can't be defended by a pawn. And he shuffles around, offers me a draw at some point, and I do eventually accept, but I want to try seeing if I can win with some tricks. Because again, I'm surprised this player has done so well this match, and I feel like I should be winning this game. So I'm attempting at some point to make king h4 a tempting move, and then to take on h2 with mate. But he never falls for it. He simply plays it really well in the end game. And again, this is why older players are good in the ending. They don't play like some other sort of more active players who attempt to win at all costs and can often have the tables turned on them. So my last attempt at winning was h4, and he didn't even take it, which I was hoping he would. I was hoping he'd take it. I can easily win the h-pawn later, and then my f-pawn is a passer, so I might be able to make a queen. But instead he played rook to c8, we trade, I take the extra pawn, so I'm now totally drawing, and then plays again the right move, king g2, and at this point I decide to take the draw, so I simply repeat moves with checks, and draw agreed. Overall, perhaps not my best game. Bishop takes b4 much earlier was certainly perhaps inaccurate, or big mistake, or blunder. I was trying a bit too hard to win, but he played really well to find all these resources, and you know, good luck to him in the rest of the tournament, I suppose. So next game in the Spring Congress will be in 2 weeks, on the Tuesday, so I'll probably be doing a video on either Wednesday or Thursday. And this coming Tuesday, on the, I want to say 23rd of February, there is a 4NCL team match, which I'll be playing in, with a time control similar to this of 45 minutes with a 15-second increment. So I'll be doing a video on that as well. Thanks for watching, see you next time. Bye.